Well, hey, what's up, Northway? Thanks for tuning in to the second edition of what we're calling the Zoom In. This is a chance where we gather and have a conversation to take the weekend's message or sermon and zoom into it and dig deeper into the scriptures. And we love to do the Zoom in light of things going on in the real world. And no doubt many of us are aware of all of just the challenge and heartache and just it's a loss right now going on in our world, dealing with the killing of George Floyd and many others that are just, they're unjust and they're awful. And most times in our minds, we realize, I know you do too, that racism is something still present in our world. And so this conversation, I'm joined by some special friends right now, is we're going to take time to extend a conversation about that, around that subject. And we're going to dig deeper into the scriptures and the gospel and this weekend's message and into real story. Because sometimes listening and hearing real experiences sobers us up and wakes us up to the harsh realities that many in our world live through. So I'm glad you're here for this conversation. Again, this is the Zoom In, and I want to take a moment to intro some friends. You can see them on the screens here. So Adam, why don't you say hello first? Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you originate from, and your favorite kind of ice cream. I don't know, make it fun.
All right. I'm Adam, like Dave said. I have been here at Northway for about 10 months now. And so I'm out of the Oakland campus, the worship director there. Originally from Detroit, by way of Appleton, Wisconsin. And so, my favorite ice cream is strawberry. I like to keep it simple.
Strawberry.
It was strawberry, but I don't think it's going to be strawberry anymore. So
you're going to choose something different.
I think so, yeah.
I think you try banana. Banana's my favorite.
Okay.
Dennis, why don't you say hello? Thanks, Adam. Glad you're here, man.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, so I'm Dennis Allen, pastor of the Oakland campus. And I've been on staff for 11 years now. Grew up here in Pittsburgh, grew up in Shaler, so one of the northern suburbs of Pittsburgh, and live in the north side now with my family. I've been here for 13, 14 years now in the city. And my favorite ice cream, I am even simpler than Adam. My favorite kind of ice cream is vanilla.
Oh, no.
I know, it's the worst choice, but it's true.
You gotta be honest.
And
I'm amazed when people say vanilla, that I'm like, out of all the choices, that's what you're going with? Like, there's so many flavors. That's me. That's not you. I appreciate the honesty. Yeah. Well, hey, so fun fact real quick. I love rabbit holes or rabbit trails, whatever they're called in these moments. Dennis and I played baseball against each other in college.
True.
We realized that we went way further back, didn't know each other. But wow. I actually do remember Dennis was a shortstop for Grove City. And I remember thinking, he's a pretty good ball player out there. He's got a good glove and some decent range. So
not a great bat, not very strong at the plate.
Listen, I didn't say any of that. I said you were a good shortstop. You didn't have to say any of that.
Just saying.
So turning into the conversation today, obviously it's an important one and it's a heavy one with everything going on in our world. But just because there's things going on right now doesn't mean that it's just become important. I mean, I think this is a conversation that's it's long overdue. And it's one that we have to have more often. And so, Dennis, we were talking and you made a great point about this weekend's message with what Amanda preached and taught with the subject of racism and oppression and reconciliation. Do you want to kind of, tease that out? There's the word. Tease that out for us and help us connect those dots.
Yeah, I think, I thought Amanda did a great job this weekend. She's one of my favorite communicators. And the way that she was talking about the way that God pursues us and the way that he chases after us. And he pursues us with his love. Mm-hmm. He covers us with his forgiveness. And by doing that, he brings us into right relationship with himself. And what he's doing there is reconciling us to himself. Mm-hmm. And when you read through the New Testament, we actually encounter those New Testament authors talking about how that work of reconciliation now becomes our work, that's work that we are to be about in our day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month lives, that we are seeking to reconcile now ourselves to other people. And Brian McCabe says something that, like, he has talked with me a lot. He's been an important mentor to me over the
real
years.
Quick, for everybody listening, who's Brian McCabe? Maybe give
Brian
a little
McCabe.
Context there.
Yeah, Brian McCabe is a pastor at Northway, and he leads our Transformational Urban Leadership Institute and really helps connect Northway to a lot of our missional activity around the city.
Right. Good.
He talks a lot about that work of reconciliation being a work that requires crossing racial and socioeconomic lines, that we have to encounter people who are different, who have different stories in order to truly live into what it means to be reconcilers. Mm-hmm. And I think for a church like Northway, it's really important for us to be able to hear from someone like Adam with his experience. I think it's important for us to hear about Adam's story of growing up in Detroit City, the experiences that he has had as a Black man, different than the experiences that I have had. Adam and I have had opportunities to talk about some of this. And so I'm excited to get to continue this conversation and just get to listen. So Adam, if you would really love and appreciate just getting to hear kind of your story and the way you bring yourself to this conversation.
Yeah. First, I want to say thanks for even having this conversation, because I know it can be really a tough conversation to have, and a lot of people really steer away from it. And for us as a church to be able to dive into this and kind of face it head on, knowing that we don't have all of the answers, I think is really, really important. Yeah. I also want to say, like, I don't have all the answers, my experiences are just that, they're my experiences, they're things that I have personally been through, have witnessed, have seen happen around me and my surrounding and how I've grown up. And I also think that it's important for people to realize that, I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm a brother, an uncle, a cousin, a nephew. I'm a preacher, I could marry you, and then I can bury you, I wear a bunch of different titles, I'm a worship leader, I can lead worship, and all of those are just titles, because at the end of the day, there's one thing that we all have in common, and that's that we're human. And I think that's where the issue gets lost sometimes, is that we forget that we're human, and as humans we automatically make mistakes. As humans we are automatically flawed. We that's just who we are. And so for me, I grew up in Detroit, on the west side of Detroit, which is one of the I would say kind of hard sides, of Detroit. And my mom raised me and 5 other kids, and she did it. She did it really well. None of us have ended up in jail. None of us have got a record or anything like that. But I witnessed so much growing up, just how our neighborhood was, like we were our neighborhood was under-resourced, my house was right next to an empty lot where trees and dead grass, it looked dead. And I remember all kind of stuff would happen over in that area. And that's just like as a kid, growing up, I didn't really have my first encounter with racism until moved. My mom moved us out of the Detroit public school system because she wanted us to have a better education, and so she moved us to the suburbs, and we still lived in the city, but we went to school, out there. And you had to do, back then, you had to like take somebody's address and do that in order to be able to even go to that school. And so that's what we did, because she wanted us to have a better education. And I didn't encounter my first hint of racism until I moved into middle school. And I was in the seventh grade, and I remember being in science class, and this kid, he had just been picking at me, and he called me the N-word, out of the blue, and that was the first time, that I had ever been called that by a white person, or a person of a different race. I've heard it, and been called it, in a plain manner, by friends, but never in a hateful way. And I remember getting so angry, like I ain't always been saved, and I remember being so angry that I jumped up on this kid. He was taller than me. I jumped up on him, and we got to fighting, and it took a bunch of people to pull us apart. And that was my first brush with racism, in middle school as a 12-year-old, and that was a wake up call for me of knowing that, hey, all right, this is real, because he used that with intent to hurt me, to belittle me. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember telling my sisters and my nieces the story of that. And even to this day, it's very real to be able to remember that first brush of racism, and then growing, and then I remember one time I was when I start driving, one thing my mom told us was, we went through, if you ever get pulled over, by the police, you keep your hands on the steering wheel and you say, yes, sir, no, sir, okay, sir. And you always make sure your hands are visible. And like, didn't understand it really, but I did it, and I made sure that I did that. Even to this day, when I get pulled over, my hands are there, and it's yes, sir, no, sir. And even now, I've been pulled over as an adult, and I've been pulled over in front of my house, just because I've been sitting there, and been pulled over in front of my house because I lived in a nice neighborhood, and it's the impression of, what are you doing here? Are you up to no good? Are you, are you up to no good? Are you trying to start any trouble because you don't look like you belong here? And even as an adult, that's really hard to process and to handle. I worked with, for years, probably for about 12 12 to 13 years, I've worked with at-risk teenagers, girls and boys. And before I really got into full-time ministry, I was working in Wisconsin with at-risk teenage boys, and I was a supervisor of a unit, and it was a unit where we were teaching our guys independent living skills. It was an independent living home to where their next step was to be on their own. And so we were teaching these kids how to do that. And I remember these kids had all kind of different issues, come from different places and backgrounds. And so the training to deal and handle with kids with mental health issues and things of that nature, like the training was super intense. And so I remember one day we had to go on to a training. And so me and my friend, who was Black, we were on our way to this training, and this training was going to help us learn some more techniques to de-escalate, teens when they were like raging and upset. And I'll never forget it. I remember driving to that training, and then all of a sudden we were probably like 2 minutes away from our destination, and all of a sudden we got swarmed with by police officers. And I was driving, and I was like, I know I didn't run a red light. I know I didn't run the stop sign. Like, I'm in my mind, I'm like, okay, what did we do? What happened? Mm-hmm. And being, probably 6 or 7 cop cars with about 8 different cops pulling up, guns drawn, scariest moment in my life, because this was kind of almost at the height of the Trayvon Martin and the other issues that were going on in the world. And when I say I was nervous and scared, like, we both were nervous and scared because we were like, okay, what did we do? And I remember they came, they were license and registration, and we gave them, everything that they asked for. And I asked, I said, well, can you tell us what we did? And got no answer. And then probably about 5 to 10 minutes later, they come back and they say, yeah, it was a misunderstanding. We thought that that the passenger was somebody that we were looking for. And they showed us a sketch drawing, and my friend, he had an afro, and yeah, he had an afro, and that was the only thing that matched, the description was, he was a Black male with an afro. And that kind of messed both of us up. Like, anything could have happened in that moment, because we looked like somebody or something. And, I've experienced a ton of racism, and it's been with coworkers, it's been within the church, I've been I think in the church, I think that's probably been the toughest, experience is the fact that you trust me to lead you in worship. You trust me to sing over you and to speak over you. But when it comes to when I'm asked to speak on tough issues and I use my voice, I'm silenced because my experiences are my experiences, and my trials are my trials. And that has been that was probably, that hurt, because church hurt is kind of the
worst hurt.
Worst hurt, and experiencing that was probably the worst kind of form of discrimination that I've ever felt. But with the events that are happening right now, one thing that I realized that God kind of showed me was that that the things that I went through within the church, forget the police officers and all of that stuff right now, but the things that happen within the church, they happen for a reason. And at the time, I was dealing with young people, and it wasn't the young people that had the issue. It was the adults that had the issues. And God showed me that those young people are the very young people today. I'm still friends, and I still keep tabs on those very young people that heard a message on racial reconciliation. Those same young people are young people who are at demonstrations that are peacefully protesting right now because they realize that, that racism is real, and that it's an issue that they can help kind of get out of the way. They are the generation that's going to help progress us and move us forward. And so God showed me that that hurt wasn't in vain, that happened for a reason. Wow. And that those young people are going to be the voice of today that's going to help change, our current state of living, so.
I think, Adam, appreciate you walking through all of that. And I mean, in there, right, we immediately begin to see some of the differences in experience. I'm not sure about you, Dave, but like my mom and dad never had to sit me down and talk about how to interact with a police officer. There was just,
I have a 15-year-old son. I thought about next year, we're going to teach him how to drive. I never once thought of that. That just hasn't been my reality.
And I think it's in part because that assumption inside of the communities in which you're living and raising your family, the community in which I grew up in and my parents raised me, was a community where policing worked, and the relationship between people and police was strong, and there was a trust there. And I think, Adam, to your point, every time I've ever been pulled over, it's because I was driving too fast. Or it's because I forgot to register a car. I'll argue that it's because I had just had two twins like a few months prior, but like either way.
Sounds like there's a backstory to that one,
right? It's a different time.
Right.
But like I've never had, and I'm sure probably Dave, like those are not shared experiences. Those are not common experiences to what I have lived, which I think gives just a little bit of a beginning into the conversation about how the way that I then would maybe naturally think about what I'm seeing happen across the country. That because I haven't had those experiences, they then don't make sense to me. And maybe because, well, my experiences with the police have always been good, whereas yours have not always been. There's been a lack of trust. There's this whole sense of like trying to place my experiences in the way that I understand the world onto our Black sisters and brothers across the country, and trying to make sense of what they're feeling and experiencing, what you're feeling and experiencing, but doing that only through the lens that I have. So I would love for you to maybe just talk a little bit about, as you watched what happened with George Floyd, and this is right all in 1 month. Dave, you mentioned like this past weekend, it was 2 weeks ago that we talked about Ahmaud Arbery. In the midst of that, we learned about a woman named Breonna Taylor. And now we have this video of George Floyd. And has led to protesting all across the country that has metastasized into something entirely different here in Pittsburgh. The violence that we've seen inside it has not been caused by the community leaders or activists who were organizing these marches. How do you see what's happening in the country? How do you see what happened with George Floyd? How do you process and understand that through your perspective and experience?
You know, like for me, I look at it, it's tough, you know, it's tough watching the cycle continue, you know, it's tough knowing that I have brothers who are law enforcement and who have been, you know, law enforcement. And, you know, I've had 3 of my brothers who have been in law enforcement. You know, one of my brothers is still active as a police officer. One of my other brothers is now mayor pro temp in Georgia, and in Fulton, Georgia, and knowing that those are good guys, you know. My last church that I was at, you know, had very good relationships with people who were officers, you know. Even coming here, you know, I met some people who play in the band who are law enforcement, and they're really good people, you know. And so one thing I hate is the fact that that the message gets lost, you know, when law enforcement is brought into it, because all people hear is all law enforcement is bad law enforcement. And that's not the reality. The reality is, it goes back to what I said earlier, like at the top, like I'm human. You know, after I take off all my titles, I'm human. After law enforcement takes off all their titles, they're human. And for me, you know, knowing in myself that all law enforcement, that I have good relationship with some police officers, that I've had some good encounters with police officers, knowing that, but then knowing the fact that there's still some law enforcement officers who abuse their power, because the reality is what happened to George Floyd was an abuse of power. Right. You know, it should have never happened. And the reason why it came to light is because it was videotaped on the cell phone. And for me, you know, George Floyd could have been me. You know, George Floyd could have been one of my friends, could have been my brother, you know, could have been my dad, you know, and it really sucks to know that we are still in the cycle of guilty because you're Black, you know. It's very frustrating, you know. Last week, watching everything that kind of happened in the news, watching the development happen, like last week was probably a very, very tough week for me, you know. And knowing, you know, that this is not going to be the last time, you know, seeing the protest, you know, that has been, you know, peaceful for the most part. It's been peaceful for the most part, but you have those few agitators who come and they agitate, you know. I mean, I feel like a lot of people have seen the video that's even surfacing around here in Pittsburgh of people who not even from here coming here, you know, to agitate and kind of stir the pot a little bit, you know. And I think what happens is the message really gets lost because you have these peaceful protests going on, and then it takes one rotten apple to spoil the whole thing. And I feel like that's what's happening right now, is that the message is getting lost, you know, in what's happening. It just takes one, and they know that. And if one person do it, unfortunately, the next person is going to say, oh, well, let me smash this and let me do this. And I wish it was different. I wish that that the message wouldn't get lost. One thing I am hopeful for is the fact that when you look on social media, you know, you see a different perspective. You see black and white and different races holding hands and standing there marching together. You know, that's one thing that makes me a little hopeful. And I think the quarantine has helped. You know, it's brought light to a situation because people are stuck at home. For the most part, people are stuck at home and they're forced to either watch Netflix or watch TV and look at the news and be on their social media platform. And being in quarantine has brought light to the fact that racism really exists, and that a man was held down for 9 minutes, you know, and died, you know, and was killed, you know. And so that's a good thing about the quarantine, is the fact that that this thing that has been talked about for years and decades is now in the forefront, because we don't have a choice but to watch.
Yeah, I
think that's phenomenal perspective. I never thought about, most times when people describe the quarantine, we describe it in negative lights. Sorry, I'm just emoting. That's incredibly insightful. Like, that's good. I'd say amen if we were in church or whatever. I think I say good. It's good. Dennis, you were going to say something else. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, again, like what Adam's describing has not been my lived experience. It's been something that I've learned and continue to learn about. Where we're raising our family, our kids attend a public school right here in the north side. They are the minority in their schools. And I remember one of the first moments of really beginning to grasp this, like this breach of trust between the Black community and law enforcement, was Keely, our oldest, was at recess playing at like a patty cake type of game. And during that, like, there's words that kind of go along with it. And she came home and told Julia about it and asked Julia, like, can we do this? And she started to repeat the words. And in it, she talked about, like, the wording was, a big white policeman shows up at my door, basically then falsely accuses this family of some wrongdoing.
Yeah.
And then the next line is, we gave the man $1 and now we don't have to hide no more. And I heard that and I was just like, wait a minute, what did you say? Like, can you repeat that to me? And I have been really fortunate over the years. Pastor here in the North Side, Wayne Younger, has been a mentor to me, and I was able to reach out to him and just say, like, can we get together for a cup of coffee? I don't understand what this means. And he kind of shared with me this idea of what you were describing, Adam, that not all law enforcement is bad law enforcement. The majority of law enforcement is good law enforcement. There are some that are not. And when you're a black man who gets pulled over by a police officer, you don't know if you're getting a good one or a bad one. And I think for me, like, that was something I only was able to begin to learn because of proximity, because of having our family placed into a community that is racially diverse, socioeconomically diverse. I literally think, like, how else would I have personally learned that lesson or begun to understand this if it wasn't for my daughter learning this patty cake game in kindergarten?
Let me ask you guys this question. I probably had a bunch more on the agenda that I wanted to talk to. This has been it's so rich, and I think we're often, I don't know if we're nurtured this way, or it's cultural, or it's life in 2020. And we just want to rush to a solution. But I feel like a piece of reconciliation, and maybe you guys can respond to this, and the call of the gospel is to sometimes just listen more. And sometimes, because you're talking, Dennis, about learning through your daughter of some reality, and I'm sitting here listening to Adam, and I'm thinking, like, I haven't experienced that, and it wakes you up to, it's like smelling salts, to, like, there's a whole nother reality that goes on in our world, and it's an evil that needs to be changed, and the gospel calls us to run toward that sort of stuff. So where do you guys, like, the gospel and reconciliation and listening and our posture as followers of Jesus? Can maybe respond to that? There's a question in there somewhere. I'm not the greatest host, so I'm sort of real timing this with you guys. So maybe Adam, do you want to find an answer to something I asked in there?
I think when it comes to the reconciliation piece, I think the only way to get there is by doing kind of what we're doing right now. You know, you have to have a conversation. You know, and I was going to share this later, but Bishop Tudor Bismarck, he has 4 steps to how we actually get to that reconciliation part. But the one piece that really stands out to me is the fact that he says that in order to really go on track to have real racial reconciliation, you have to be willing to be uncomfortable. You know, you have to be willing to sit and be in an uncomfortable spot and be able to listen and be able to take off your experiences and what you've, you know, your privilege, you know, you have to be able to take off your privilege and listen to why people are saying, you know, and I'm paraphrasing now, but you have to be willing to listen to why people are saying Black Lives Matter. You know, it's not that all lives don't matter, you know, because all lives do matter, you know, but people have taken that narrative and kind of switched it, you know, and not even people. I would say more so the media than anybody else. You know, they've taken that narrative of all lives matter, of Black Lives Matter, and turned it and switched it to all lives matter. And so that's the big issue. Well, my life matters, my life matters, my life matters. And yes, your life does matter, you know, like, but we're talking about the issue at hand. And in order to really get to racial reconciliation, and in order to really get there and have some kind of peace, like you have to understand that I heard somebody say that that my house is on fire. You know, my house is on fire, and somebody else says, well, and I call the fire department to take out the fire, but somebody else comes and they say, well, my house matters. You are definitely right. Your house does matter, but your house is not on fire right now.
Right.
My
Right.
house is on fire.
That's good.
And so I need the fire department to come and take out this fire for me. In other words, I need my white brothers and sisters and my brothers and sisters of Asian and Mexican descent. I need you guys to come alongside me and to hear me out and to realize that there is an issue at hand. And I need you to help I need you to use your voice to help. And I think if you use your voice to help me and listen to what's going on and see what's going on, just because it's not in front of you does not mean that it's not happening.
That's good.
You know, and I think that's where people get where people get lost, because it's not in front of me. You know,
Right.
like racism isn't in front of me. Yeah, it might not be in front of you, but look next door. Maybe it's in front of your neighbor. Maybe it's in front of that person who sit next to you in church. Maybe it's in front of, you know, that person that's taking care of your kids. You know, I think when we begin to share each other's hearts, you know, when you can feel my pain and I can feel your pain, I think that's when we can begin to have some kind of reconciliation. I think we have to know, you know, that God, you know, that he does not have any favorites.
Right.
You know, the Bible talks about it over and over and over again, that he does not show favoritism, that he does not love these people more than he loves these people. The Bible says that he loves the sinner, and like we're all sinners. Like he loves those who follow him, and he loves those who don't follow him. You know, and John 4:8, it says, anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. Like what is that saying? What is that saying right now? And to me, it's saying that God doesn't condone racism. He doesn't condone hatred. That he is love. And in order for us to have true reconciliation, we have to know that we have to love each other. Like show me that you love me by listening to me, and not saying that my issue does not exist. Show me that you love me by being a brother and a sister and coming alongside me and locking arms with me and saying, you know, I don't experience this, but if you say that you have experienced this, then I want to be there for you. You know, I want to be there for you. I want to walk with you, you know, and like I said, when you talk about having the reconciliation as far as the gospel message, you know, even John 13:34, it says, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another just as I loved you. You know, you are also, you also are to love one another. And to me, that's saying, again, God is unbiased.
Yep.
And he loves us. He loves us equally without showing favorites. You know, I think that's one of the roots of racism, and that's one of the roots of what is the word I'm looking for? Oh my goodness. it's one of the roots of racism and discrimination, is that people think, like I'm better. And so
Right.
because this is who I am, like God loves me more. And that's not true. I think of the story of the woman at the well that Jesus met. She was a Samaritan woman and he was a Jew. And like back then, you don't talk to one another. You don't come out at the same time. You
Right.
don't interact with each other. And Jesus interacted with that woman at the well, and she said, why are you talking to me? Like, I'm a Samaritan woman. And he says, I don't care. In a nutshell, he says, I don't care who you are. Like I know you, like I know you. And even though you are in this situation that you shouldn't be in, even though you're with that man that you with, he not your husband, like even though you're with doing the things that you're doing, like I know you and I still love you, and I think we have to get to that point where we know each other, like that's the only way to have some kind of reconciliation. We have to get to know each other.
I think you point out, Adam, that it takes time. If you guys are both married, you're still getting to know your wife.
Mm-hmm.
As our kid, I'm married. As our kids get older, we're still getting to know our kids and our spouses. And I think where you started off too was just profound. Like we can't run from the uncomfortable.
Mm.
Like when you were talking about the Black Lives Matter and well, doesn't my life matter? I think that's a natural reaction because that makes us feel uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's like a coping or a defense mechanism. And all it does is it just pushes the problem or potential solution or reconciliation further out, right?
Mm.
Because we are afraid of awkward and uncomfortable in so many areas. So I love it. I think that's so helpful. And then when you tie it back to what Amanda said, I guess I'm just responding again right now. God's pursuit of us pushes past uncomfortable and pushes past how long it takes for us to make our way home or to turn and run to the Father like the prodigal son did. Dennis, any kind of, I think I got to land our plane just in terms of time. There's so much more I want to ask.
I think that's,
maybe we'll do it again, but
well, I think that's exactly why I think this conversation is so important and why it takes time and why it's not something that is just easily accomplished in one conversation. I think like hearing what Adam is saying, I think one of the things that I had to learn is that my experiences are not normative. And I think we
define normative, Dennis.
That idea that like, well, just even though Adam grew up in inner city Detroit, his life should work exactly the same way that mine did.
Right.
Like I look at my life and I think like, well, just go to a better school, get a better education, work harder. Like all of those things that we think apply and work in our own world and lives, we uncritically believe that those can just be passed on, and that like it takes humility. And I think it takes listening to begin to realize that my experience is not normative. Adam's experience growing up as a Black man in inner city Detroit was categorically different than mine as a white guy growing up in the suburbs of Pittsburgh. And I need to recognize that. I think, one of the things that as we talk about it, right, one of the reasons I think this is incredibly important for us here in Pittsburgh is that Pittsburgh is considered to be the worst metropolitan area in the entire country for Black women and men. last fall, there was a study that came out. It was called the Pittsburgh's Inequality Across Gender and Race. And like, this is one of the quotes from the co-author, Junia Howell, speaking about the results of the study. It says, what this means is that if Black residents of Pittsburgh got up today and left and moved to the majority of any other cities in the US, automatically by just moving, their life expectancy would go up, their income would go up, their educational opportunities for their children would go up, as well as their employment opportunities. And so I think this conversation is incredibly important for us to be having as a church, because at the heart of our mission is to impact the Pittsburgh region with the hope of the gospel. And in order to impact the Pittsburgh region with the hope of the gospel, that means taking seriously the reality of the fact that our Black sisters and brothers are growing up and raising families and living in a city that's not conducive to health, financial well-being, positive educational outcomes, widespread employment opportunities. And I think as a church, we have to do the hard work of reckoning with that. So,
and I think on top of that, I think when we talk about the church, I feel like if we are really, really like believers of God, then we have to realize that there's no room at all for division or for racism. Like we have to realize that. The Bible says it says that we should be able to carry the burdens of one another.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, that goes back to looking out for one another. That goes back to saying, okay, I see it and my silence is not going to work anymore.
Right.
Like I have to speak on it because I see it and it's not right, and my brother is over here hurting, my sister is over here hurting, and I feel that pain.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, guys, thank you so much. I think when conversations like this start to bring light, and light is what, Dennis, you always say this, the only thing that drives away darkness is light. And I think conversations, like you said at the beginning, Adam, we don't have all the answers, but it's so important that it's worth having a conversation and bringing light to it and bringing voice to what is reality and what's real for people. I appreciate both of you guys deeply, and I'm thankful you're at Northway on team in Pittsburgh. Man, you guys make me a better follower of Jesus. I mean that. So thank you so much for who you guys are. And Northway, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you hanging in and digging into this conversation. And if it was uncomfortable, it's a good thing. I think it's important that we allow and we lean into those moments of discomfort so that we experience, weakness, where God shows up and shows himself as strong for us. So may we continue to speak and to bring light and to have conversation and to stand up for and to stop oppression wherever it exists. God bless you all. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you later. This has been the Zoom In. Thanks.